In the heart of the jungle lies a city built for gods. Its towers pierce the clouds, its stones carved with the faces of kings who once believed they ruled the heavens. This was Angkor, the crown of the Khmer Empire, a world so grand that even the earth seemed to bow to its power. But every empire has a moment when glory turns to shadow. For Angkor, that moment came when the Siamese armies of Ayutthaya marched east, carrying ambition like fire through the forest. The year was 1431. The great city, once home to hundreds of thousands, was dying from within. Famine gnawed at its heart, and its kings, lost in divine rituals, could no longer command the loyalty of their people. Across the plains, the Thai warriors advanced, disciplined, hungry, and relentless. When the two forces finally met, the gods of Angkor did not answer. The empire that once conquered by divine right now fought merely to survive. This is the story of Angkor's final battle, a tale not only of war and ruin, but of pride, betrayal, and the silence that follows the fall of kings. At the height of its power, the Khmer Empire was a realm so vast and magnificent that even the winds seemed to whisper its name. Angkor, its radiant capital, glimmered like a mirage above the jungle. From its towers, priests watched the sunrise turn the earth to gold. The king, the Devaraja, the god king, ruled as a bridge between heaven and humanity. His word was law, his image carved into stone, his temples built to mirror the divine mountain of the gods. It was said that in Angkor the line between man and deity no longer existed. But empires do not collapse in an instant. They crumble in whispers. By the 14th century, beneath the splendor and the chants of devotion, the Khmer world was already beginning to fracture. The mighty reservoirs that once brought water to the rice fields began to choke with silt. Seasons shifted, the rains grew unpredictable, and the canals that had sustained 1 million lives fell silent. Famine followed drought, and the people turned their prayers from gods to survival. Within the royal courts, luxury continued as if time itself could be commanded. Silk banners fluttered in the heat, dancers moved to rhythms that spoke of divine order, and incense filled the air like fog. Yet behind the palace walls, rebellion stirred. Local governors withheld tribute, soldiers deserted their posts, and merchants whispered that the empire's borders were shrinking. To the west, in the fertile plains beyond the Dangrek Mountains, a new power was stirring. The Siamese of Ayutthaya, once vassals of the Khmer kings, had grown restless. Their kings were ambitious, their generals disciplined, and their people hungry for glory. Ayutthaya's temples began to rival those of Angkor. Its armies marched farther each season, and its rulers declared that their destiny lay in the conquest of the old god king's empire. The first clashes were small. Siamese raiders moved through the borderlands, plundering towns and testing the Khmer defenses. Smoke rose along the Tonle Sap as villages burned, and survivors fled eastward with stories of fast-moving warriors, their war elephants painted with blood-red sigils. The Khmer generals dismissed these tales as exaggerations, but soon the truth became undeniable. The Siamese were not merely raiders, they were conquerors in the making. Inside Angkor, life carried on as though untouched by the growing storm. The city still pulsed with energy. Traders from China, India, and Arabia filled the markets with silks, pearls, and spices. The smell of grilled fish and jasmine rice hung in the air. Children splashed in the canals and temple bells rang out across the flat horizon. But the sense of unease was spreading. The royal astrologers warned of ill omens. A lunar eclipse painted the sky blood red, and the priests whispered that the gods were turning away. The king, Jayavarman Parameswara, faced an impossible burden. He was heir to an empire already worn thin. He strengthened his armies, rebuilt temples to appease the spirits, and sent messengers west with demands for peace. None returned. The Siamese response came not in words, but in drums. By the dawn of the 15th century, war had come to Angkor's gates. The Thai king Boromaracha gathered his armies, their banners bright with gold and crimson. The sound of their approach rolled across the plains like thunder. Elephants marched in formation, their tusks capped with iron, their riders armored in bronze. Behind them came the infantry, tens of thousands strong, bearing longbows, spears, and torches. The first battles were fought in the borderlands, where Khmer fortresses once stood as guardians of the realm. They fell in weeks. The Siamese moved with ruthless precision, capturing water routes and cutting off the supply lines that fed Angkor. The Khmer armies fought bravely but were outnumbered and outmatched. Their weapons, forged in an age of peace, broke against the steel of Ayutthaya. As the enemy drew closer, Angkor's defenders looked to their walls. The city's moats, once filled with sacred water, became their last defense. The great causeways, lined with stone guardians, became rallying points for the soldiers. Monks prayed night and day, their chants echoing across the temples of Angkor Wat. In the markets, families bartered their last possessions for food. Mothers whispered to their children of the old kings, telling them not to fear, for the gods would not abandon their city. But the gods had already fallen silent. When the Siamese army arrived at Angkor's gates, they laid siege to the city with grim patience. For months, the Khmers resisted. They fought in the rain, in the smoke, in the shadows of their own temples. Arrows darkened the sky, and the cries of the wounded filled the night. Each day, the defenders grew fewer, their resolve worn thin by hunger and disease. The canals were poisoned, the moats ran dry, and the sacred lotus ponds turned black with decay. Inside the palace, the king held court by candlelight. His advisors argued whether to fight or flee. Some urged surrender, believing that the Siamese would spare the sacred city. Others swore to die defending it. Jayavarman chose defiance. He ordered his generals to hold every gate, every bridge, every wall. The Khmer warriors obeyed, but their strength was fading. The final assault came in the wet season of 1431. The Siamese attacked from the west, where the great causeway led to Angkor Thom. They battered the walls with catapults and flaming projectiles until the stone itself seemed to scream. The Khmers fought back with boiling oil, spears, and sheer desperation. But when the dawn came, the city's gates lay open, not from victory, but from collapse. The defenders could no longer stand. The Siamese entered Angkor not as looters, but as inheritors of its corpse. They walked through streets lined with abandoned houses, through courtyards where statues of kings lay broken. They entered temples where offerings still burned before empty altars. The great city, once home to nearly 1 million souls, was silent. No one knows what became of King Jayavarman. Some say he escaped into the forest with the royal regalia, vanishing into legend. Others claim he perished in his temple, refusing to flee. The truth is buried with the city itself. The Siamese stripped Angkor of its treasures, gold, jewels, and manuscripts, then withdrew, leaving behind an empire gutted and hollow. The survivors fled eastward toward Phnom Penh, carrying with them their gods and grief. The capital of the Khmer Empire was no more. As the months passed, the jungle crept back over the ruins. Roots split the stones, vines crawled across the faces of the old gods, and the song of the forest replaced the chants of priests. The people who once called it home began to tell stories of a city that had angered heaven, a city swallowed by the earth itself. But Angkor did not die. It slept. Beneath the vines and soil, the towers of Angkor Wat still reached toward the sky, as though defying the world to forget. The Khmers who survived the fall carried its memory in their blood. Every festival, every prayer, every story they told kept the empire alive in spirit, even as its stones sank into shadow. The fall of Angkor was not only the end of a civilization, it was the end of an age. It marked the moment when the world's greatest city was reclaimed by time, when kings became men again, and when the gods themselves seemed to close their eyes. Yet from its ashes, a new chapter began. One written not in triumph, but in survival. When the smoke cleared, the silence that settled over Angkor was heavier than any roar of battle. The Siamese armies marched away, leaving the city stripped but not entirely dead. Fires still burned in the courtyards, licking the edges of fallen statues. A few survivors wandered the streets, searching for food, family, or forgiveness. In their eyes, the reflection of their own gods stared back from the pools of stagnant water. The age of the divine kings was over. For generations, the Khmers had believed their rulers were chosen by heaven, their temples the homes of immortals. Now, those temples stood open to the sky, exposed and vulnerable. The people who once looked upon their kings as living gods saw only men who could bleed, flee, or fail. The illusion that bound empire and faith together had shattered, and from its pieces came something both tragic and enduring: memory. The survivors moved south, following the rivers. They built new settlements in the shadow of what had been. The most enduring would become Phnom Penh, a city born not of conquest, but of refuge. Here, the Khmer court rebuilt what it could. A smaller realm, humbler, wary of the ghosts it carried. But every festival, every offering, every prayer still carried the echo of Angkor. The empire was gone, yet its spirit lingered like a haunting. Meanwhile, in Ayutthaya, the Siamese celebrated their victory. They had conquered the greatest city in the known world and carried away its treasures, manuscripts, relics, artisans, even priests. The Khmer influence seeped into their culture like ink in water. The Thais adopted the Khmer script. Their architecture borrowed the grace of Angkor's towers, and their court ceremonies mirrored those of the fallen god-kings. In triumph, Ayutthaya became what it had once envied, the new center of power, carrying within it the soul of the civilization it had destroyed. But conquest carries its own curse. For every empire that rises upon the ruins of another, a shadow follows. The Siamese would later face their own fall, their golden city burned centuries later by the Burmese, just as Angkor had burned before. History, it seems, does not end. It repeats, wearing new crowns and new names. Back in Cambodia, centuries of quiet endurance followed. The forests swallowed the ruins, yet the people did not forget. Farmers worked the soil around the ancient stones, believing the gods still watched. Monks returned to the deserted temples, living among the carvings of faces that smiled in eternal calm. They swept the floors, relit the incense, and restored the chants. For them, Angkor was not lost, it was merely sleeping. Time moved on, the world changed, kingdoms fell and rose again, but the towers of Angkor Wat remained, steadfast through centuries of rain and heat. Birds nested in their spires, trees split their walls, but also held them together. Travelers who stumbled upon the ruins spoke in awe of a city so vast and silent it seemed beyond human hands. To the Khmers, these stories were not discovery, but confirmation. Their ancestors had never truly vanished, they had simply become part of the earth itself. When French explorers arrived in the 19th century, they believed they had found a lost city. But for the Khmer people, it was not lost at all. It was their heart, still beating beneath the jungle's green skin. the explorers marveled at the carvings of celestial dancers, the endless corridors of stone, the faces of kings gazing serenely from towers high above the forest. They called it a wonder. The Khmers called it home. Even as modern nations took shape, the memory of the old conflict remained buried, but not forgotten. The borders between Cambodia and Thailand became lines drawn through centuries of pain. Temples that once symbolized divine unity now stood divided by modern disputes. One such place, the Temple of Preah Vihear, perched atop a cliff at the edge of both nations, became a symbol of pride and contention. Both countries claimed it as their own, and once again, soldiers faced each other across sacred ground. The ghosts of Angkor and Ayutthaya still whispered there, as though the stones themselves refused to rest. Yet this rivalry is more than anger, it is inheritance. Thailand carries within its culture the traces of Angkor, its art, its architecture, its rituals. Cambodia carries within its heart the will to endure. The two nations are bound together by the very history that once tore them apart. What was once a battlefield became a mirror, reflecting both glory and loss. The fall of Angkor changed the course of Southeast Asia forever. It marked the shift of power, the birth of new kingdoms, and the fading of the old. But it also gave rise to something far greater than empire: resilience. The Khmers, stripped of divine kings and armies, found strength in memory, faith, and art. The temples they left behind became more than monuments. They became symbols of survival. To walk through Angkor today is to feel that paradox. The city is both ruin and living testament. The walls whisper with the songs of lost centuries. The bas-reliefs tell stories of gods and warriors, of festivals and battles, of victory and ruin, and somehow of peace. The faces carved in stone do not mourn, they smile. It is a smile that endures through conquest and decay, a knowing smile that reminds the living that nothing truly ends. As night falls over the ruins, the air thickens with a stillness older than memory. The cries of birds fade, and the jungle hums with unseen life. Somewhere within the temple walls, the faint sound of chanting drifts through the corridors. Monks continuing prayers that have never ceased, even after 600 years. Torches flicker against carvings of kings who once called themselves gods, their eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. In that silence, you can almost hear the final moments of the siege. The clash of metal, the rush of fire, the desperate voices calling for help that never came. And then the soft surrender of a world fading into legend. The gods did not fall that night. They withdrew, leaving humanity to remember them through stone and story. The fall of Angkor is not a tale of simple defeat. It is a meditation on impermanence, on the fragile line between faith and power. It teaches that no kingdom, no matter how divine it seems, can escape the turning of the earth. The Khmer Empire rose by the will of its people and fell by the weight of its own grandeur. Yet in that fall, it achieved something immortal. Because even now, centuries later, Angkor still commands reverence. Pilgrims walk its ancient causeways. Historians study its mysteries. Photographers try to capture the light that glows upon its stones at dawn, a light that seems almost divine. The city may have lost its empire, but it gained eternity, and in that endurance lies its true victory. For while kings and armies vanish, while borders shift and wars repeat, the stones of Angkor remain. Witnesses to every triumph and every loss, testaments to both the pride that destroyed and the faith that preserved. History tells us how empires die, Angkor tells us how they live on. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history.